So, Silicon Valley is known for building amazing technology and technology companies that have a global scale. Today, what I'm interested in kind of having as a conversation is how the lessons apply to how we change the world and how we live our individual lives, rather than just building companies. The kind of classic questions are, how do you have a breakout? How do you make your company or your product 10x, 100x? How do you get to hundreds of millions of people? What are the Archimedean levers by which you can have a disproportionate result or impact on the world? And part of the reason I look at Archimedean levers is you're looking at a compact piece of work that can then scale to very large effect or impact. And what are the hypotheses that are fundamental to your company? Like, if this turns out to be right, you can have something that's like Facebook or like Twitter or like Pandora. That this plays into something that could be something that hundreds of millions of people could be in a network or in a marketplace or a platform. How does that all work? And finally, what is your kind of competitive differentiation to get to that scale? And the reason I ask these questions of a startup, and we're going to get to these, how you ask these questions in an individual life, is that these are the things that get to how do you take an intelligent risk? What are your hypotheses that if you see something that other people don't see, and you can take a gamble on it, you can create something of note? And so I thought I would start by talking about a few of the kind of for-cause organizations. I actually prefer the description for cause rather than nonprofit as a bridge to thinking about individual lives. Because the question is, how do how is it that you target breakout and scale in terms of meaning, in terms of the impact that you're having on the world? So I'm going to go through 4 organizations very quickly in order to describe them and then bridge that to how we can think about how we live our kind of individual life strategies as being the entrepreneurs of our own lives. The first is Kiva, which I myself am on the board of. And the basic idea of Kiva, so one of the things that you have in each of these organizations is an idea, is that we could provide an online marketplace for microfinance so that everyone here, everyone in the world can provide microloans to entrepreneurs in emerging market or essentially poor countries that can then build businesses to sustain themselves. And the key idea and hypothesis is the microfinance economics, the ability to enable yourself to be a sustaining, ongoing business is the right way to create change. And that lots of people, us, would help people if we thought we could do that on a peer-to-peer basis. The breakout idea is you can create an online marketplace that it can essentially scale to hundreds of millions. It's the same cost structure, whether it's $1 million or $100 million, roughly, round it. And so, if you can just get it distributed to the right folks, you can actually have this disproportionate change in terms of how the world works. And so the impact already with Kiva is tens of thousands of essentially entrepreneurs of the micro scale in over 15 countries have bought taxi cabs, started grocery stores, and all the rest of the things as the impact for doing that. And so and Kiva takes these Silicon Valley principles of, okay, how do I deploy technology? How do I have a scalable model? How do I essentially get a breakout that goes to large scale, and that the scale can actually create like a marketplace, and takes that on a for-cause basis. Do Something, which is an organization run out of New York, and basically says, okay, well, if we can get teens involved in philanthropic action, where they can essentially kind of learn already that they can do something bold, they can make a change in the world, they can do something for society, for the people, for a cause that they care about. If we can enable that so that it doesn't require a car, a parent, or a payment, right? It's something a team can do. So once again, you kind of deploy technology and you think, okay, I create a network. This time it's not a marketplace, but it's a network by which people can coordinate with each other, identify which causes they want, express their identities, and that the kind of breakout idea is once again a kind of version of not just is there an online platform that people can use, but it spreads by word of mouth. Because by being social creatures, it's you want to do things with your friends. And so you can go, teens can go to their friends and say, hey, I had this cause that I really like. let's go do something together. This is how we organize it. Donors Choose, the third of the four organizations, also based out of New York, is one that's very appropriate to an educational environment. Because the idea was, how do we enable innovation within educational institutions? In this case, it's high schools and below. And where we allow teachers to be their own innovators. Because the question is, how do you have, they can have ideas, but how do they get the budgets, the projects, and to do things that are interesting? Well, again, the idea was apply an online marketplace. Apply these tools of creating an online forum by which people can publish projects, teachers can publish projects, and then folks who care about that, whether they care about the area, they care about the subject. For example, when I first discovered Donors Choose, my wife is a speech-language pathologist, and I work in entrepreneurship. So I typed in entrepreneurship and autism, and I found a project that was teaching essentially subclinical kids marketplace dynamics. And I was like, oh, I'll fund that, right? As a way of essentially creating an enablement of change. And the impact that you have when you look at this kind of scalable thing is all of a sudden a whole group of teachers, you think in terms of human ecosystems, a whole group of teachers can now host projects and say, okay, here's the thing that I want to teach my kids. Here's the thing I want to do. Here's the piece of innovation I want to do. And then they can be backed by people who care about it because they can find it. And again, it's initially, and I'll get to saying a little bit about how this plays to individual lives. Here again, the central thing is marketplaces and scalable technology and being able to do bringing people together, which will be morphed when it gets to individuals. But these kind of things can then get to essentially hundreds of millions of people. Scale and size is not an issue. The last one I wanted to mention because I think it's interesting, especially from a information and technology point of view, which is partially relevant to the information school, is Mozilla. Because Mozilla looks odd in the scope of, if you look at kind of the first three nonprofits and causes that I was describing, you can actually deploy kind of Silicon Valley entrepreneurial techniques in order to create. They all have kind of classic interests. The interest is poverty and self-empowerment. The interest is education. The interest is teen participation and civics, kind of in the creation of life. And Mozilla is like, all right, well, this is a nonprofit, but it's about running a browser, and it's about kind of the technology and the freedom of the web. But this kind of infrastructure, in terms of thinking about how to essentially make sure that we have an open ecosystem of innovation, not one commercial company, essentially dictates by owning the browser, is part of what allows the whole kind of consumer internet ecosystem that we've all come to benefit from and enjoy. Because what Mozilla essentially does is make sure that none of the big boys essentially say, oh, we own the browser, so we're going to try to own the internet. It keeps it open, and it's a derivative impact to what we as consumer internet folks do. And again, their basic idea was, look, I mean, this is sometimes entrepreneurship is just being this bold, is look, we're just going to publish a browser, we're going to call it Firefox, we're going to see what happens. And because it gets to scale where you can have, like for example, roughly 20% of the internet traffic now goes through Firefox browsers, that's the kind of scale you can get to when you kind of apply these techniques. So how does this apply to how we think about kind of our individual lives? And if we take seriously the notion of being the entrepreneur of your own life, how do we think about this? I'm going to refresh the questions, which is, how do you get to a breakout? What is the kind of the Archimedean levers? What are the compact pieces of work that you can do to move the world? Right? Competitive differentiation. What's your differentiation against other folks? And which hypotheses are you following in order to potentially achieve something of scale or achieve this massive difference? And the thing that's interesting is I don't think that we apply enough these questions to how we think about as individuals. Because you normally think, okay, that's what a business does. They have technology, they hire a whole staff, they have a marketing department, all of these things. So that's why those questions apply to businesses. But the way that they apply to individuals is that you think about, all right, how do I have a breakout in what my capabilities are, or what my skills are, or what my ability to have a position to lever the world is. And when you begin to think about those questions, you think about, okay, how is it that I get a location or a network, a set of people that we can work together in order to make something happen? Skills and insights that know where the market's going, because frequently as an individual, how you achieve a breakout is you see something that other people don't see early enough and you act on it. So for example, you go, all right, well this technology change is happening, or this market change is happening, or this region is really going to build out something spectacular, and I'm going to do something. So part of how you answer the question of how do I break out as an individual is that you say, okay, how do I either make one of those trends or participate in one of those trends? And and think about that is to ask yourself seriously the question of how do I come to a 10x point of capability than where I was before, and what are the things I need to invest in order to get there? Similarly, in terms of Archimedean levers, the things that you can think about are not just, well, I have a skill set, I invest in getting an education for 2 years and getting a skill set that is, but the question is, what kinds of things can you set in place that give you a 10x capability? And obviously, skills and ability are part of it, and a position of being able to deploy resources, whether you become a professor, or you become a founder, or you become an executive of a company. But also part of the thing, in terms of thinking about this, is, all right, what are the networks of people around you? What are the insights that you have to how the world is changing that are actionable and things that you can do something about as an individual that other people don't see? Because when you have that competitive differentiation, you can create something of note. So what are the commandments when it comes to kind of being the entrepreneur of your own life? I think one part of it is to always think creatively and boldly. Where do you see a massive opportunity? Where do you think that something is going to change, that you see something that is potentially different than what most other people see? Part of being a successful entrepreneur is to be contrarian and to be right. It's the two that are particularly important. Because basically, if it was obvious to everybody, there's no market opportunity. There's no gap to go do something and do something at an extraordinary pace. So you have to identify a place as a whole, but then you have to be right about it. And part of what you do as an entrepreneur is you kind of start multiple companies. Most entrepreneurs have actually started a few, and you use that experience as a way of going forward. Well, the same thing applies to individual lives, which is, okay, keep thinking about how do I see something where I'm contrarian and right, and how is that a breakout in terms of how do I achieve what I want to achieve? And it's not just a question of money or companies, or those are things, those are important, but also in terms of how do I live a life of meaning and have an impact when I look back on my life. I think that was the life I wanted to live. Similarly, think about what can be local to you. Right? So one of the benefits, the privileges we have being here in Silicon Valley is that we have this culture of entrepreneurship. We have this culture of an individual with an idea, a piece of technology, can go create something that can affect 100 million lives. It's enormous honor and privilege, and sometimes a responsibility. What are the things that, with the assets that we have, that create competitive differentiation? What can we do with that? And then as part of doing that, take intelligent risks. Because a little bit like being contrarian and right, the question is to make intelligence, but one of the things I think about modern life is that modern life always has risks. It was this kind of old career model 40 years ago. You work for IBM, you work for IBM your whole life. That's gone, right? And so the world is changing at kind of like a consumer internet kind of revolutionizes every 2 to 3 years. So it's changing at a pace that you need to adapt to. And that adapting means you need to take intelligent risks. So figuring out how to do that in a really good way is part of what can give you a competitive advantage. If there's a lesson, I think, from Silicon Valley entrepreneurship, it's that being bold with intelligent risks as an individual, you can accomplish something of note. And these are the lessons, I think, that don't just apply to companies, but apply to how we live and how we think about our lives and our careers as individuals. So my congratulations to the class of 2011, and I hope that you live your lives entrepreneurially. Thank you.